Dear students, welcome to week 10. This week we talk about generosity in negotiation. I would say also in dispute resolution, but I think we'll focus again a little bit more on negotiation. What is generosity? Generosity is a concept that means we share what we have, right? It can be money, it can be food, it can be our emotions, good humor, our time, our ability to listen, right? And how does this impact negotiation? How does the giving to others, one of those forms of energy, how can this affect negotiation? Obviously in a positive manner. Well, one golden rule that is behind generosity is that always treat others as you wish you will be treated yourself. Right? So if I'm generous, it's because I hope you're generous too. Right? So that tells us already from the beginning an important element of generosity, that generosity has to be spontaneous and it has to be unconditional. Only unconditional generosity is perceived and felt and probably likely reciprocated. One other important thing is generosity is not, it's not just, how to say, a behavior. It's a value, right? It's a value that can be joining very different cultures and very different people. And therefore, we should not underestimate the value of generosity even when doing business. When we're talking about money and assets and transactions, generosity is a value that we can share in common with others, and it can help the negotiation and it can help our business dealings. When I say it is a common value, and this is what I'm going to do in the next slides, I'm going to show you that it is indeed a common value. I took a bunch of religions and spread all over the world, and they probably represent the majority of people on this planet. And you'll see that in very similar ways, all these religions preach generosity. Some of them even talk about generosity and trade. So let's see how different faiths share this principle of generosity. Now, before we do that, as I said, religious systems are very important because religious systems are those that provide most of the common values that we have in our society. And they connect us to many of the things we have already studied. Can you, for example, imagine some of the dimensions that are affected by religion as a system of values? Of course, common values, but also cultural context, collectivism, right? And also stereotyping biases that form at the ground of religion. Now let's start our quick review. I'm not an expert in religions, I have to be honest, but we all read that article for this week, and each of you may be practicing some of these religions. Surely, in that case, know more than me about that. But let's focus on generosity. You can see Buddhism make generosity one of the virtues that will allow you to reach the state of highest wisdom and nirvana. Buddhism encourages the shift from purely self-interested business practices to a holistic and compassionate approach to business, where success is not just measured by financial gains, but also by the impact that the business and the deal may have on people's life and even the whole planet. So generosity in such a context is very important, because for a Buddhist, you don't only satisfy through business transaction earthly needs and financial needs, but also bigger spiritual needs. right? And of course, Buddhism emphasized the fact that if you are generous, you will be wealthy. And it doesn't mean only wealthy in money, because it is expected to a certain way that a generous person is then also lucky, right? But also in spiritual terms. So it's a spiritual wealth. So definitely generosity in Buddhism has a central role in the life of a person, in his path towards the highest levels of spirituality, but it affects also daily life and daily business, as we have just said. Well, for Christianity, we start with the golden rule, right? I think any Christian knows that you should not do to others what you don't want them to do to you. So be nice to others, so others will be nice to you. Don't be bad to others if you don't want them to be bad to you. So that's the golden rule already. So it means generosity is embedded as a core principle in Christianity, right? And this applies all interactions between humans, and including business interactions, employments, right? I would say suppliers, customer relations. As a Christian, you think, don't lie, be honest, and being generous is part of the set of principles that you that you try to implement when you deal with other people, also in business. So if you're a true believer, you want to honor the Lord, and you want to do it following those principles of honesty and generosity, right? And somewhat, and this is something, a concept I'll see in the next slide too, we have the belief that everything comes from God, and therefore the things on earth don't belong to us, they belong to the Lord. And when we do something, we do it in the name of God. And therefore it is nice to honor the Lord with generosity, and when doing business, using generosity and as giving back to the community and support spiritual causes, right? And therefore, again, generosity has to be spontaneous and sincere, and not just a fake generosity aiming to obtain a specific material advantage. When I think about Christianity and trade, always come to my mind this young gentleman on the right that is covered by this blue cloak. I don't know what it is, maybe or a gown. It's depicted by a medieval painter from my hometown, Florence, in Tuscany, Italy. And this young man is St. Francis. Is becoming St. Francis, or just become St. Francis from the aura you see around his head in this painting. So, we know that he's a symbol in Christianity of generosity, because he gave all his earthly good for the glory of God. So from being very rich, the son of a merchant family in Assisi, Umbria, the region of Umbria in central Italy, he decided to become poor and to dedicate his life to help others, and he gave all he had to others. So we have this principle that derives from Christian religion of generosity because every resource, as I said before, belongs to God, and therefore Christians are called to be responsible in using those belongings, and you must give them to those in need, and you have to be happy when you do that. And therefore generosity negotiation can mean considering also the other party's well-being and striving for a win-win solutions for mutual benefit. And you have Catholic Gospel Matthew, if a man takes the coat, let him have the coat also, and ask it not of him. Again, don't get it back. You don't have to give it and then you want it back, right? But also Martin Luther, for the Lutherans, for the Reformed Church from the 16th century, you have to give freely to those in need. So very strong principle of generosity. One last thing about Christianity is about lending money. You know that for Christians, lending money at usury interest, it would be a sin, and therefore, when you lend money, you have to be responsible and focus on help others, right? And don't expect a personal gain. So again, you know, there's always this component of generosity, even in lending the money. So generosity for Christian also in doing business and in lending money is a commandment. Judaism, also a religion that focuses a lot on generosity. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is one of the tenets, and the act of loving kindness is the highest priority for Jewish people, and therefore you have to help those less fortunate than you, even if they're not Jewish, even if they have a different background. There's actually a concept of tikkun olam, is a central Jewish tenet, and means the act of world repair. That means you need, as a person, you have to take actions to improve the world, improve the people around you, and through the mitzvot you do good deeds, including charity giving. The tzedakah. I'm sorry for those who can pronounce it correctly. I'm sorry if I mispronounce those words. And overall, again, the Torah prescribed every Jew should contribute an equivalent to 10% of their income every year in charity as a sign of generosity. So it transfers also to business. In Islam, here's a quote for a Quran. Practically, business is not just about accumulating wealth, but is a noble pursuit. That has to be pursued ethically and with sense of social responsibility. And you will benefit from that, because your business will prosper, not because you're good at doing the business itself, but because you're generous at doing the business. Right? And generosity is cooperation, generates feelings of respect, affection, freedom from rage, and create popular support. So giving means many things. It means giving to charity is an investment in the afterlife. So you get a spiritual reward, same like for Buddhists, same for Christians. Right? Generosity is purifying the wealth you touch and bring blessing to that. So material thing that could be seen as vile, material transaction can be sanctified by your acting with generosity, and giving to others fosters compassion and empathy, gratitude, right? And promote personal and moral development, and it starts a beneficial cycle that helps and contributes also to creating a better, more equitable and happy society. One thing that I cannot help thinking about Islam is the amazing generosity of their traders, their hospitality, their making business with passion and offering and giving and patience. If you go to if you remember, you go back to class 1, week 1, when we talk about the difference. One of the authors recounted the difference between the experience in China and the experience in a bazaar of doing bargaining in a bazaar in Istanbul. You can't help not remembering that seller that's so patient, offering tea and inviting you to sit down and talk and get to know each other before even starting dealing with business. Hospitality is one byproduct typical of Islamic religion, generosity. Hinduism, for me, the word that comes immediately is karma. So if you do something bad, you'll get something bad. If you do something good, you'll get something good. So if you want to be successful, you do good. If you don't do good, you attract misfortune, right? So and that's the big tenet. So being generous is compelling because it means that it's the only way to live a good life and to get success and spiritual benefit. And they focus more the attitude to possession rather than the object itself, right? So that's another aspect of how spiritual trade can be for Hinduists. Now, we have talked about common value religions. I went through very quickly a few of those religions that are very big and cover large swaths of the whole global population. But what happens to the many, many millions of people who don't believe in any religion? So I was asking myself this because the article you read only talks about the value of generosity as derived from religious religious systems. But I ask myself and I ask you, what about communist countries? What about capitalistic countries? Does communism, because communism still exists nowadays, like not like places like China or say Russia, surely still structure on the Soviet system, so to a certain extent, but for surely culturally still very much affected by 70 years or more of communism. And many other countries are communist, not just Vietnam. So there are many systems where communism is still ruling. So I wonder, how do they value as communist generosity? Does communism, Marxist value generosity? On the other hand, if I'm an American or a European, I'm not religious, but I believe in the capitalism, this is what informs my daily life. Do I have generosity parade as a capitalistic businessman? Do I care about generosity? If I don't have really a hook to it, to generosity through religion, well, Marxist, to what I know, and I have been, having worked with China for over almost 30 years now, and I had occasion to study communism and study China's communism. Well, Marx didn't like charity. Charity for Marx was the way in which the upper classes, the oppressing classes, the capitals, kind of fool around with the workers. So religion is the opiate of the people, and therefore anything that has to do with religion is bad. And charity is the way that is a form of exploitation by the capitalists, right? So definitely Marx didn't really didn't think much about generosity. Now about capitalism, I have a quote here. Let's see if you know who said that. How selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature, not religion, nature, which interest him in the fortune of others, and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. Adam Smith. So yes, well, capitalism seems to, if we take Adam Smith by the word, it seems to recognize value to generosity, right? And whether this is a completely spontaneous and genuine generosity or a quid pro quo type of generosity, well, I don't know. I haven't studied further. I just stopped at this quote because I wanted to throw a little provocation. But I would say between Marxists and capitalists seems to recognize a value and a role in generosity, and unlike religions, they make it derive by one of the natural principles by which we human beings interact with each other naturally at the state of nature. So very, very interesting position, right? And why did I say before, is that a quid pro quo? It seems that he implies that first you get rich, first you get what you need, and then you can be generous. That's what Adam Smith said, because that's the natural condition of humans. First we are homo homini lupus, we are wolf to each other's wolves, right? And we bite on each other until we find and settle for a certain order, social order. And but again, I'll leave this open to discussion maybe in our class, live class. Interesting anyway. To conclude, I just anticipated before with the bazaar example, negotiation in business is not always about money or only about money. It's about trust, it's about relationships, and generosity can definitely help build relationships. Being sincere means generosity, not demanding a quid pro quo, not demanding something in return. It's important because if it's perceived to be insincere, it could be a trick. It could be a tactic to extort some benefits from others by tricking them into believing you are generous, but in reality you are not. So perception of sincerity is very important, and that's why calculated generosity might not be real generosity. Okay? At the end of the day, trust is the most important thing. What happens though if you're betrayed, if you're exploited? You're generous, but the other party doesn't reciprocate or doesn't even say thank you, right? Doesn't even recognize and acknowledge your generosity. Well, I think you should still be generous. You should still stick to your gun of generosity, and rather than starting a vengeance and a spiral towards lack of confidence and suspicion that will destroy the trust and the relationship if someone doesn't reciprocate your generosity. Now, if someone tries to exploit your generosity, you might decide not to finish the deal. That's for sure, because you can say, I can't trust you. That doesn't mean you have to counter-trick them or show generosity that is not unconditional. So overall, yes, still stick to your generosity even when you see that your trust has been betrayed. What you should do is try, if possible, to rebuild that trust. And we know many ways that we have learned in the past weeks how you can try to rebuild the trust if that business is important to you. All right, and this is all for this week, and thank you. See you next week.